Okay, now we get to our gospel passage, which comes from Mark chapter 7, verses 31 through 37. Again, Jesus left the district of Tyre and went by way of Sidon to the Sea of Galilee, into the district of the Decapolis. And people brought to him a deaf man who had a speech impediment and begged him to lay his hand on him. He took him off by himself away from the crowd. He put his finger into the man's ears and, spitting, touched his tongue. Then he looked up to heaven and groaned, and said to him, Ephphatha, that is, be opened. And immediately the man's ears were opened, his speech impediment was removed, and he spoke plainly. He ordered them not to tell anyone, but the more he ordered them not to, the more they proclaimed it. They were exceedingly astonished, and they said, He has done all things well. He makes the deaf hear and the mute speak. Okay, so obviously this is like the connection here between our first reading and our gospel passage is really clear. But before we get to that point, let's hold on just a minute. So Jesus, it says, is in the district of Tyre. He's leaving Tyre and he went by way of Sidon to the Sea of Galilee. So where are these places? These are actually Gentile territory. So Tyre and Sidon are north and east of I suppose maybe I need to go this way with my hand gestures. Anyway, they're north and east of the Holy Land. So he's actually in Gentile territory, which is a fascinating thing, actually. And so last week, you remember this. We heard Jesus talking about the scribes and the Pharisees. And the scribes and the Pharisees, he's kind of going back and forth with them about their traditions, that they're diminishing the commandments of God for the sake of their traditions that they're holding on to. And then Jesus has this back and forth with them, and he talks about the things that defile a person, all these different things, evil thoughts, unchastity, theft, murder, adultery, greed, etc., all these things. But then from that place, I don't know, just as I read it, and this isn't me knowing things for sure, but as I read it, it's like, okay, he's got this back and forth with the scribes and the Pharisees who just don't really get it. Like he's come to save them, to bring them a new outlook on life, on eternal life, on like the forgiveness of their sins and all that stuff. And these people, they don't really get it because they're clinging to their human traditions. You think of this, like I'm clinging to this. I might see that you're doing some really cool things, healing people and preaching and all this really cool stuff, but because I'm clinging to my human traditions and I'm undercutting the commandments of God, well, I don't want to let that go, because if I let that go, I don't know what's going to come, that kind of a sense. And so Jesus, perhaps, I'm just guessing, was like, okay, I got to leave. I got to get out of here because these guys don't get it. And so I'm just going to go and I'm going to find people who do get it. And so he goes, and we actually skip over a passage. And the passage we skip over is Jesus and the Syrophoenician woman. And I'm sure we skip over it because I think we read it last year during year A in Matthew's gospel. And so I know that we did. So maybe the church is just saying, okay, we don't need to read the same thing twice. Although there are certainly times when we read the same miracle twice or the same moment twice. But I suppose it's just like, okay, we got that last year, so let's just jump over. Anyway, the Syrophoenician woman, a Gentile woman, a non-Israelite person, her faith is so strong that it seems like Jesus is trying to push her away when because of her faith, she's like, no, but I'm not going anywhere. That in itself is something worth reflecting on. Is like, what if I came to Jesus and not only did he not answer my prayers, but then he even did something that seemed like he was rejecting me outright? Would my faith in him be so strong that it's just like, okay, I don't care what you do, Lord. I believe in you. I believe that you're going to lead me to salvation. I believe that you can perform this healing that I'm looking for, and so I'm stuck with you. I'm sticking to you. Like that. That's not the gospel for this Sunday, obviously, but there's this beautiful thing of like the faith of this woman that actually leads Jesus to say, like, I haven't seen such faith anywhere. For saying this, you may go. The demon has gone out of your daughter. In Matthew's gospel, he talks about like your faith is so incredible. It's healed you, in fact. Okay, so then from that place, so from that positive encounter, so negative encounter with Israelites, positive encounter with Gentiles, and now we got another encounter with Gentiles where he was going, and the people brought to him. So he's in the Decapolis, this place that is like 10 cities put together. So he's in this big area, this really like well-populated area. The people, they know about Jesus. This is, again, another fascinating thing. The Gentiles know about Jesus, and they bring someone to him for healing. Now, it's true that there are other times when Jesus goes into Gentile territory and they reject him. when he cast the demons out of the pigs, out of the swine, the people come out of the town and they beg him to leave. So it's not every time that the Gentiles accept Jesus, and for that matter, it's not every time that the Jewish people reject Jesus. We know that's not the case, but it's just a stark contrast that Mark is laying out here before us. So these people, these Gentiles, bring this person to Jesus who is deaf and he has a speech impediment, and they beg him to lay his hand on him. So who knows what they know about Jesus, but somehow they've heard that Jesus, when he touches people, he brings healing. And so it's like, okay, well, you can touch this guy, and when you touch him, that you can heal him. And you think, I mean, the sense you get from the gospel is like, yeah, it seems like it's that simple. Like, trust in Jesus, believe in him, and let him touch you. You know, this last week's first reading from Moses in Deuteronomy, what does he say? What great nation is there that has gods so close to it as the Lord our God is to us whenever we call upon him? And that's Moses writing about God, let alone like when Jesus, who is God, comes to us and he draws so close to us that it's just like, Jesus, all you got to do is touch me, and I know that you can be healed. And yet, what does Jesus do? He goes above and beyond that, to the point of actually being a little gross in my mind. You know, like, so what does he do? Well, he took him off by himself away from the crowd. So that's a fascinating thing. It's like, okay, well, I'm going to take care of this guy, but we're just going to go over here and you're not going to be able to see it. And there's like this question of like, why does it need to be away from the crowd, away from the noise? I don't totally know. I suppose some people would say, well, in order for us to really encounter the Lord, we need to escape the noise of the crowd so that we can be with him by ourselves in private, you know, to have that sense of like personal prayer where we have the Lord, where we have our public time with him in worship and maybe even public prayer, but we also want to have personal time of prayer in private. That's just a guess that I have. I don't actually know why he takes him off, but when he takes him off, what does he do? He put his finger into the man's ears and spitting touched his tongue. Like that's really gross. You think about it. Like I don't go around putting my finger into people's ears, whether they're deaf or not deaf. And I don't go around like spitting on my hands and touching their tongue with my saliva, or even with just my hand in general. That's something that I wouldn't do. That probably anyone watching this video would not do this. And yet Jesus, he chooses to do it. Why does he choose to do that? Well, I don't know, but one person I was listening to suggested that he is being so explicitly connected to this prophecy from Isaiah 35 that he does these very explicit things, even at the risk of seeming overly gross. He does it to clearly point out who he is and what he's about, because when this happens, he looks up to heaven, he groans, right? So there's this inner thing that's happening inside of Jesus, and he speaks in Aramaic, Ephatha, that is, be opened, and immediately his ears were opened and his speech impediment was removed and he spoke plainly. So Jesus, so our first reading, what do we hear in Isaiah 35? Here is your God. He comes with vindication, and when God comes, then people who are deaf are going to be able to hear, and people who are mute are going to be able to speak, and people who are blind are going to be able to see. And what do we see in this man? Well, he's got 2 out of 3 of these, and we know that in other places in the Gospels, Jesus heals people who are blind. And so he so explicitly connects himself to Isaiah that what is he ultimately revealing? He's ultimately revealing that he's God. Because why? Because he's fulfilling the very thing that Isaiah said only God would do. He's fulfilling, like God, Isaiah says, God's going to come, and when he comes, this is going to happen. And now in Jesus, he does these things, and this happens. So therefore, Jesus must be God. You know, like that, so. Even more from Moses, what great nation is there that has gods so close to it as the Lord our God is to us? And who is it that he comes to touch? Who is it that he comes to bring healing to? Is those who are rejected by society. You know, like in our world that we have now, people who are blind, people who are unable to speak, people who are unable to hear, they can kind of make it. I mean, there's certainly limitations that they have on the way that they live their lives, and we provide help for them. But that's the thing, is we provide help for them. Back in Jesus' day, they didn't always provide help for those people. In fact, in many ways, they rejected them outright. And so Jesus comes to those people to bring healing. We'll see more of this when we look at our next reading, the second reading, where James is going to talk about this, how the Lord has a particular care for those who are poor, for those who are desperate. because the sense is like, look, you need to be desperate so that you can desperately understand how much you need me. And by the way, I've come. And so draw close to me. Come and fling yourself upon me because I want to open up your life. I want to open up. So Jesus performs this physical healing, but he also wants to perform, as I mentioned in the last session, he also wants to perform these spiritual healings. He wants to open up our eyes so that we can see as he sees. He wants to open up our ears so that we can hear the word of God and actually let it penetrate into our hearts. He wants to open up our mouths so that we can actually have the courage that we need to speak to people about the goodness of God in the person of Jesus. That's what he desires. He wants to bring this healing to us. And so that's at least part of what is being revealed here is like, here is your God. He comes with recompense. He comes with vindication to save you and to save me. And then that after this thing, there's this really strange thing that takes place where it says Jesus ordered them not to tell anyone. This reality that takes place in the Gospels, and I think I've mentioned this before, but this thing that's called the messianic secret, that Jesus, for some reason, it's kind of strange. He doesn't want people to talk about who he is. At least not yet. Certainly that time comes, like when he makes his triumphant entry into Jerusalem, that kind of thing. I mean, and sometimes he's very bold about his own preaching, about how we need to eat his flesh and drink his blood in order to have life within us. Certainly that's absolutely true, but there's also this strange sense of Jesus trying to keep a low profile, perhaps for the sake of not trying to draw too much attention, which will lead to a premature execution. He knows that he's going to be executed. He knows he's going to be crucified. He predicts it at least 3 times. But he also knows that there's a particular timing that needs to take place in all of these things, and this perhaps isn't quite the timing yet. And yet, even though he talks about, like, you can't talk about this, it says the more he ordered them not to, the more they proclaimed it. So, like, and I suppose, like, how could you not? Like, hey, man, what happened to you? You were deaf and mute, like a couple of days ago when I saw you. Yeah, well, let me tell you about this. And this is actually, okay, this is really cool. So this is a more extraordinary miracle than I think we really let ourselves understand. Like, yes, okay, someone was deaf and suddenly he can hear. That's incredible. Someone was mute and suddenly he can speak plainly. You think of babies. What happens with babies? They have to learn how to talk. They have to learn how to use their mouths. This man was healed and was suddenly able to speak. Like, it seems like without problems. Maybe there were still some things he had to learn, but it says that he spoke plainly, that he like could suddenly speak a language. That is actually like an extraordinary thing if you let yourself think about it. Sometimes, try to learn a different language. Try to learn Spanish or Italian or German or French or whatever, and it's like, can you suddenly speak those languages? Well, I know I can't. I've tried to learn different languages, and it just doesn't work all the time. It takes time to learn these things. And this man immediately was able to speak plainly. So that's an incredible thing, that the Lord not only provides healing for him, but that his healing is so strong, is so powerful, actually, that it's like an additional sense of healing, an additional level of healing in what he provides. So good. Gosh. Okay. Now, like I said, we're gonna look at our second reading from James, and we're actually going to see there's a connection here of Jesus looking upon the lowly, coming to heal them, and actually using them for the benefit of his kingdom. So we'll come to that in our next session. Okay, peace.